Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for making yourself available. We're about to start. Assalamu alaikum, bonjour, dear all. I am Bokar Al-Faba, the country manager of Invest in Africa in Mauritania, and I'm most pleased and honored to welcome you to this multilingual awareness webinar jointly delivered with Invest in Africa Senegal, thanks Ibakal and team, as well as Control Risk and United Insurance Brokers, UAB. The today's session will be on insurance control, cyber resilience, and compliance. What an interesting and much needed 90-minute sensitization session available in French and English to tackle some of the major topics in this tricky world. COVID, Ukrainian war, rising inflation, jobs in the Sahel region, all these things that are happening throughout the world. Invest in Africa is a leading local content and capacity building not-for-profit organization working together in Mauritania and Senegal to give local SMEs the best possible chance to benefit from foreign investors and industry giants who want to use their local buying power as a force for good. Invest in Africa puts together capacity and capabilities building, helping local suppliers understanding the unwritten rules and improvements they need to make to their business to be competitive. How and where can they get these new skills, certification, qualification, standards needed, or how they can access finance or better conditions of funding. We work hard with all key local stakeholders in a timely, fair, and transparent manner, just like today's webinar shall demonstrate. It's to bridge the communication and information gap on how to best work with multinationals. Success for us is about creating sustainable local business that can diversify and create jobs, but none of this is possible without the support from our founding and paying partner like BP, not to mention, or where I'm currently located, the Nouakchott International Training Center headed up at the Petrol Minister here in Nouakchott. We are presently here at the NETC, and we are presently enjoying excellent conditions to give you this webinar for free. So we'll have now from Control Risk, Mrs. Rolake Oladapo, senior consultant with an extensive experience in the areas of investigation and compliance reviews. We'll have also UAB, Mr. Carlos Reda, who is associate with an extensive experience in the insurance industry, property, political violence, energy, mining, and general manufacturing sectors worldwide. We will have also Mr. DiMaggio Rigby, head of cyber media and technology with significant expertise in arranging and negotiating complex insurance solutions with a strategic focus on the African continent. Presentation will be followed by a Q&A session, questions and answer session. Kindly feel free to suggest questions in the chat box. We cannot make any promise to answer all of your questions, but we'll do our best to take the most of your questions, and we just wanted you to excuse us in advance for not taking all the questions. So many thanks for joining us. You are extremely numerous. You are more than 160 registrants and almost 100 how can I put it? Actually attended this event in English and in French. Please also feel free to indicate us in the chat box if you want more sessions like this on similar topics. Thank you again and enjoy your session. Rolake, are you okay to take the floor?
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Alpha. Just a second while I try to share my screen. Okay. Again, thank you very much, Booker Alpha, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rolake Oladapo. I am a senior consultant with Control Risks. Control Risks is a specialty risk consulting company, and we have over 36 offices throughout the continent and throughout the world. I am based out of our Lagos, Nigeria office. I am in our forensics practice, and I am mainly responsible for assisting or conducting projects and investigations and compliance reviews in the West Africa region and in the wider Africa and Europe, Middle East and Africa region. I have over 10 years experience in assisting companies to either build or strengthen their compliance programs. So I come in, or I speak today as one with hands-on knowledge of how companies have sort of built their compliance programs and how they kind of strengthened those programs over the years. And today I'll be speaking to you about some of my real life experiences and some of the ways that I have, in the course of my career, areas where I have identified as areas where I have seen, like pitfalls in companies' compliance programs, and how we as Control Risk advise companies on how they can avoid such pitfalls and stay on the right side of compliance. So first off, I just kind of wanted to discuss very briefly what compliance is at a very high level. So essentially, compliance serves as a company's second line of defense. So in reality, or in the practical terms of it, what that means is the compliance function essentially has the responsibility to identify the risks that a company is exposed to, and also to assist management to sort of navigate and mitigate those risks. So essentially, the compliance function is actually a really, really important function in any business, and is a very strategic, has a very strategic pillar in a business. So we'll go right into it. One of the key areas that would ensure that a company has or can build an effective and a robust compliance function is, first of all, you have to know your business. So essentially what that means is having an understanding of the business itself. So the sort of services that a business is offering, the sort of partnerships, for instance, that the business will enter into, and then of course having an understanding of the risks that the business is exposed to, and then having an understanding of the industry itself. Another key area where businesses need to really understand is the political climate and the regulatory environment. So here we're talking about the extractives industry, right? And of course, in Senegal and Mauritania, oil and gas is something that's still being discovered, and production is yet to start in those countries. So as companies in the extractives industry, it's important to understand the regulatory landscape, the regulatory environment for those industries. And because those industries are still being developed and it's production is yet to start, it would imply that the regulatory landscape is still evolving. So there's still a learning process. So it's important that as companies in the extractives industry, it's important to understand the regulatory interfaces. It's important to understand the regulatory agencies, for instance, that you'd have to deal with. That way you kind of address your compliance program to suit those risks that you have identified. Another key area is understanding the political landscape. And, when I think of, for instance, I'm based in Nigeria, when I think of, like the political landscape in Nigeria, and I think of when, during the times of election, it's usually an unstable period, and typically investment into the country, into Nigeria at that time is usually, well, investors usually monitor, the political situation. So having that understanding as a company that is set up in this, in the region, having the understanding that, okay, during the time when, like elections are imminent, investment might slow down, having that understanding and putting measures in place to sort of mitigate those risks and have that knowledge that, the investment might slow down will be critical to the compliance or developing and strengthening the compliance program at that time. The second key to understanding and knowing your business is having an understanding of the risks that the business might be prone to. And one of the key ways of knowing that is to conduct risk assessments. So essentially, a risk assessment will highlight all the risks that a company is aware of, and then assess the nature, the severity, and the likelihood of those risks crystallizing. So that way, if you understand the nature and the severity of the risk that your industry is exposed to, that way you can sort of tailor your investments appropriately. So it would go without saying that in areas where it is perceived that the risk is higher, and the likelihood of that risk crystallizing is high as well, you would sort of tailor more resources to mitigating that risk. So having an understanding of the risk that the company is exposed to and also the severity of that risk allows you to channel your resources appropriately. And then the third point, when developing a compliance program, you should include the buy-in of all and input of all business leaders. And one of the ways of when conducting a risk assessment, essentially, one of the ways of doing so is having conversations or discussions with all the business leaders to understand the specific risks that they have identified within their purview and within their specific business processes. So when conducting a risk assessment, for instance, it's important that, like all the business leaders are involved. Compliance is not a function that is designated for only a certain part of the business, but it should involve, there should be involvement from across all parts of the business in order to effectively and efficiently mitigate the risks that the business might be exposed to. Another key point in building a robust and effective compliance program is creating a culture of compliance. So now, essentially what that is in very simple terms, encouraging an environment where people do the right thing. And I'm pretty sure, one of the key aspects when we speak of compliance and when we speak of essentially creating a compliant environment, one of the key things that we speak of is tone at the top, and creating a culture where things flow from the top, so from the leadership level down to the more junior staff is key. Understanding when we found in my experience, I found that where junior staff have a sort of like a yardstick or a when executive management, for instance, exemplify the culture that is communicated within a company, it's easier for junior staff to follow through with that culture and with that tone. So it's really important for the executive level staff or executive management and C-level suite staff to exemplify the culture it is that they're trying to imbibe within the company. The second point is that compliance programs should be applied consistently throughout organizations, and this point speaks to international companies where you have, like you have an international company that's headquartered elsewhere, and then you have like local offices in different countries or spread about the country. So in those sorts of instances, it's important that the compliance program that is applied at the headquarter or at the top level is consistent with what is applied throughout the organization in different parts of the world. Now, while I say that, I also would add that it is also important that in applying compliance programs across the continent, it's important to also factor in the local dynamics of the various offices and in different countries. Now, as I say that, I think of the cultural differences. I think of the regulatory differences as well. The political landscape across different countries will vary, and the sorts of risks as well that, for instance, control risks in Nigeria as opposed to control risks in the UK is prone to will differ. So if I take West Africa as an example, I think of one of the major risks that is consistently highlighted in West Africa is the anti-bribery and corruption, or bribery and corruption risk. So in that sense, when building my compliance program in West Africa, I would need to factor in that bribery and corruption risk might be higher in West Africa as opposed to elsewhere in other parts of the world. So while compliance programs should be consistent throughout companies at different locations, the local environment needs to be considered, and those compliance programs need to be translated to the local environment in which the company is operating. The third thing that I think of when I think of creating a culture of compliance is education. One of the key things in a compliance program is knowledge. So it's important to educate staff at various levels throughout the company on the compliance program, on the importance of compliance, and the consequences for non-compliance as well. I have found that in instances where the consequences of non-compliance are communicated throughout the company, or where the compliance program is transparent, we found that there tends to be a higher chance of employees sort of sticking to or complying with or adhering to the compliance programs in companies. The other thing that I will add here is that rather than training be generic, training should be tailored to specific job functions, and just to sort of facilitate an understanding of how an employee's actions or lack of actions will affect or could affect the company, for instance. So, and again, compliance training should also be tailored to the specific environment in which the company is operating. And again, when conducting these trainings or when educating staff and employees, it's important to use examples and use instances that are relevant within the specific job context, within the specific job function, and within the context of the wider local or within the local context. So the next point is testing and continuous monitoring. What I would say here is that it's one thing to put policies in place. It's one thing to document policies and communicate these policies to staff. But taking it a step further means that companies actually test these policies to determine whether or not they are working or whether or not they are effective in accomplishing the intentions of the policy. So beyond just implementing compliance programs, it is important for companies to sort of test the specific areas of the policies to determine areas where either they might need to improve on the framework or areas where they might need to change entirely the method for identifying non-compliance, for instance. Monitoring here sort of speaks of taking a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach to compliance. So one of the key areas where monitoring essentially helps to identify areas where there might be inconsistencies, areas where there might be non-compliance. It kind of raises a red flag to certain areas and channels a company's or the compliance functions focus to specific areas. And I'll give an example. One of the key areas where we're seeing or where I've seen things evolve as a consultant is with the use of data. I mean, the technology industry in West Africa is developing, and we've seen companies sort of employ the use of technology and place heavy reliance on their data to assist them to identify issues of potential issues. So essentially, data could help to raise red flags, as I said earlier, in instances where a company might need to focus their attention on a specific transaction, for instance, or in a specific area. And one of the ways we've seen this play out is especially in the area of bribery and corruption. One of the projects that I have been involved in has where we reviewed data and we reviewed transactions relating to gifts. When we identified a certain transaction which seemed like an anomaly in terms of the frequency with which it was paid, and also the amount that was paid. So when we identified that transaction, we began to ask questions, and those questions eventually led us to believe that it was not a pure transaction and it was potential bribes. So essentially, data can sort of serve as a cursory tool to help companies identify areas where you can focus your attention, or identify red flags, for instance, in your daily activities. And one of the areas as well that I've sort of I've seen the compliance function kind of struggle in my experience has been relating to resourcing. So a lot of times I have come across companies that have limited resourcing and have limited capabilities in their compliance functions. So an area where a way to address that is to apply a risk-based approach to compliance audits and compliance reviews and monitoring as well. So that way, companies can sort of identify the areas of risk where risk is higher and channel their resources to those specific areas. So compliance audits and also the use of data and technology are very key to taking a proactive approach to compliance and to ensuring that companies are aware of the risks that they are exposed to, rather than realizing this after these risks have sort of materialized and crystallized. And then just as a conclusion, I thought it would be good to go over what compliance is not. As I mentioned earlier, compliance is not a one-size-fits-all solution. It should be tailored to the specific environment, the specific business, political environment. It should be tailored to the specific risks that a company is exposed to, and it should also be specific. It should also be tailored to the specific cultural nuances in a company's operating environment. Compliance is not a reactive measure. As I mentioned previously, compliance should be proactive, and the ways that can be done is through compliance audits and compliance monitoring. So that way companies can proactively identify areas of risk or areas where they might be prone to non-compliance. Compliance is not a tick box approach. I have seen this on several occasions where, you know, compliance is viewed as just a step-by-step list, essentially a list just ticking the boxes, but that's not what compliance should be. Compliance should be tailored to the specific, should be taken with seriousness and tailored to the specific risks that a company might be exposed to, and essentially one of the ways of avoiding enforcement, for instance, or the consequences of non-compliance could be through, you know, ensuring that the specific risks identified during or throughout the compliance program and during the reviews or the development of a compliance program are ways of mitigating exposure to sanctions and enforcement as a result of non-compliance. Compliance should be transparent and it should be communicated throughout organizations. When instances of non-compliance are identified, it should be communicated throughout the company, and the consequences as well of non-compliance should also be communicated throughout the company. Compliance is also not a one-off. It's not a one-off. It's a continuous process. It should be continuously tested. It shouldn't be tested once, and it shouldn't be monitored as a one-off. It should be tested continuously, and it should be continuously improved, and it should also be continuously adapted to the changes in the local environment as well. And that will be all for my presentation.
Thank you very much, Rolak. You said so many keywords for the next panelist. So, Carlos DiMaggio, are you okay? Carlos, to take the floor, please. Excellent, thanks. So we're gonna share the same presentation on the French room. Can you please give us a few seconds just to do that? Thanks for that.
Could you start sharing? I'll be sharing.
Okay, Carlos, you are good to go.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I just want to thank first Invest in Africa for the opportunity to be here and the opportunity to present in this webcast, in this seminar. Very quick introduction. My name is Carlos Rueda. I am Colombian and I have experience in the insurance industry of over 25 years, 20 of which in the London market, mainly dealing with property and political violence insurance. To start with, we are going to talk about the impact of insurance. Insurance is one of the pillars of our financial system. It's not very well. It is not very well. Is not mentioned often enough as one of the pillars of the financial system. But without insurance, none of the usual activities like driving a car would be possible, or building any mega projects, construction projects would be possible, because no one will be willing to risk some capital without some sort of insurance. Unfortunately, a lot of people perceive insurance as a cost or something that is not necessary. But as you will see later, as you will see in the following slides, it is not a cost. It is necessary. Just to point out how important insurance industry is, during the financial crash in 2008, everyone talked about banks being bailed out by financial institutions in countries. And one of the biggest companies in the world, ENG, was bailed out by the American government. It was considered that ENG was too big and too important for the American financial system to let it go under. So this shows the importance of insurance in some way. Following the information provided by Swiss Re, one of the major reinsurers in the world, in 2021, there were 280 billion of losses of natural and man-made disasters, of which 270 billion was just natural catastrophes. Unfortunately, only 119 billion were covered by insurance. So the gap, as you can see, is very big between what is insured and what is not insured. And unfortunately, the penetration of insurance in third world countries, non-developed countries, is very small compared to the first world countries. So there is a big impact when a natural catastrophe happens there. Of the non-man-made non-natural catastrophes, man-made disasters, it is important that this excludes war, but includes any major terrorist attacks. Just a few examples of claims and disasters that have happened. That is, in March 2001, what was the biggest offshore oil platform in the world sank. That belonged to Petrobras in Brazil. The loss, it wasn't sure.
Carlos, sorry, we don't see your screen. Or maybe we're not at the right slide. Sorry, at the right slide.
Okay, sorry about that.
I guess we are on slide 4 about historic claims Petrobras.
I don't know what happened there. Yeah, that is Petrobras, the oil rig that sank.
But we don't see it.
P36. Is that correct, Boca?
No, I still don't see it. I guess I'm not the only one. DiMaggio? Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, this one. Yeah, excellent. Now we see it. Yeah.
Now, okay, perfect. That is the Petrobras, that it was insured at the moment by $135 million US. The next one, is a major disaster again in Brazil. It was the breach of a tailing dam in a São Marco mine that belonged at the time to Vale. This was the result of this catastrophe were 19 people dead and 668 kilometers of rivers polluted. These were a lot of people were convicted here for not taking proper care of the dam, but the liability, the third-party liability insurance of the company was not enough at the moment to cover the cost of the disaster. So this shows that also property and third-party liability insurance are very, very important. Now we move out of Brazil this time, back to April 2011, Japanese tsunami. That's mostly known for the damage to the Fukushima power plant in Japan, product of an earthquake. Something to point out here is that the earthquake risk in Africa is quite low, but it still exists. There have been only 4 earthquakes with magnitude 7 or above in the Richter scale since 1900, and being the largest one was a 7.3 in Tanzania in 1910. The main risk for earthquake to Africa is located in the north of Africa, of the countries of Morocco and Algeria. Coming on, this is a fire in a powerhouse in Morocco in 2021. It started with a small leak of oil in one of the turbines, which was not spotted on time, caught fire, and as you can see there, the fire destroyed the whole of the powerhouse. That is more a machinery breakdown and fire insurance. And moving to something that is more, well, it's in the news every single day now, especially since 9/11, it is sabotage of terrorism. Unfortunately, that's something that the whole world suffers, and I don't see an end to it. Then we just have two events randomly, obviously, the World Trade Center and then a metro, the bombing of the Russian metro in 2017. Continue with the same theme, again, another problem, strikes, riots, or civil commotion, malicious damage. And there we have pictures of what happened in Algeria between 2010 and 2012. And finally, we have some insurrection, revolution, and rebellion, which is what happened in Egypt in 2011. We'll go a little bit into further detail into this to illustrate how events could develop a little bit later in the presentation, because we are going to focus a little bit later on the political violence insurance. And finally, war and civil war. All these perils can be covered by insurance, and this is something that we are seeing almost every single day on our TV screens or on the news nowadays. And part of the risk management process is identify the risks, analyze, decide what risks are acceptable or not, and then mitigate or transfer the unacceptable risks. This is where obviously insurance comes in. The insurance, although people see sometimes insurance as a cost or insurance as something that I have to take, the insurance helps to improve the risk Most insurance companies and most insurance help clients to improve the risk via survey reports and recommendations, which these survey reports carried out by insurance companies and by reinsurance companies. And those recommendations should not be seen as something talking bad about the risk. It's just to be seen as comments on how to improve the risk. Following these will create some resilience in your risk by improving the quality of the risk and the risk management of the company, which in turn will help you with the business continuity and the long-term strategy and long-term state of your business. And the important thing here is that if you are going to trade internationally, you want to trade with multinational companies, you want to be a reliable partner to them or the export market. Having a proper risk management process and having proper insurances in place gives these companies and the international markets the confidence to work with your company. For example, having all the right third-party liability risks, having all the cargo, having all the fire and other insurances will help and will show your long-term strategy and your long-term partnership with all the companies that you are deal with or you plan to deal with. There are many types of insurance that we have. Obviously, we have the property of risk, which is my specialty, in which we have more or less, we've covered them and we showed the various losses that we have there. We have earthquake and natural perils. Natural perils include wind, hail, flood, machinery breakdown, contractors, plant and equipment, control of well and operators extra expense. This is for energy companies to control that special insurance for the wells. And then we have the last one, which is political violence. The other main type of insurance, you have the third-party liabilities, which I think is self-explanatory. Financial lines, for example, the financial lines, you will have directors and officers to cover any activities of the directors and officers. You will have the bankers' blanket bonds to cover all the possible losses incurred by financial institutions, theft, etc. And also within the financial lines, you have bonds. And finally, we have all the personal lines, which include life insurance, kidnap and ransom, and other health-related insurances. Moving a little bit about something that is very on the news every single day, which is political violence. And this is something that can be covered by insurance, and that's one of my specialties. And within political violence, we can cover sabotage, terrorism, extractive commotion, malicious damage, insurrection, revolution, rebellion, mutiny, coup d'etat, and finally war and civil war. You can buy these perils from 1 at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But for example, it's going to be very difficult for you to buy 7 just without including any of the previous ones, or 6 without any of the previous ones. For example, mutiny and coup d'etat, you cannot buy just insurance for that without buying insurance for insurrection, rebellion, malicious damage, extractive commotion, terrorism, and sabotage. And the reason for that is that sometimes it is very difficult to differentiate going downwards, while it's quite easy to differentiate going upwards. I explain with an example. We have, as mentioned before, this is what happened in Egypt in 2011. What started as a protest against the government of Hosni Mubarak in 25th of January 2011, just mainly to protest against police brutality and the lack of freedom and the general repression carried out by the government of Hosni Mubarak. It started with what you could say a strike and civil convention, people taking over Tahrir Square, and just the various other protests, both in Cairo and Suez. The violence continues to intensify due to the repression of the government and the clashes with the protesters, with in 20th of January, which is still with coverage, remains being strikes, riots, and civil commotion. Can you? By the 2nd of February 2011, especially what was just a strike civil commotion to start with, is beginning to look more like an uprising, an insurrection, or what we could almost a revolution on a rebellion. Because by then, obviously, from the beginning, the idea of the protesters was to for Hosni Mubarak and its government to resign. But then, as the protests continued and the violence intensified, they just want to throw the government out. So it is becoming like an uprising and insurrection, and it's very difficult to know between the 28th of January and the 2nd of February 2011 when a strike, a riot, or civil commotion becomes an uprising or an insurrection. To finally, by the 11th of February 2011, it had become a revolution, and it ended with the resignation of Hosni Mubarak. As you can see, just something that starts quite peacefully, which could be just a normal protest, slowly develops into strikes, riots, civil commotion, and you can clearly see from the protest to the strikes, civil commotion, and then slowly moving to insurrection to end up in revolution. So that's why we can get coverage for 1, 2, 3, and the different periods. But it is very difficult for you to buy just cover, let's say, for revolution, because you don't really know when things become a revolution. It is very difficult if you're going to claim. It is very hard to pinpoint exactly when things really become a revolution. And obviously, it is not included there because it is not the case. We can include cover for war in case war is declared. The only, for example, the insurance market is right now having quite a lot of losses out of the war in Ukraine. At the moment, obviously, because the war is still going on, it is impossible to quantify, but people put it around $40 billion US. There were losses arising from the war in Ukraine. Looking a little bit more at political violence, we have 3 different standard wordings used by the London market for sabotage, terrorism, malicious damage, and 2 wordings that include all the above plus political violence and war. These are the definitions. The definition of terrorism is the normal market standard definition, which is a person acting alone or in connection with any organization for political, religious, or ideological purposes, which is the main driver here. It has to be committed for political, religious, or ideological purposes. Otherwise, it just becomes malicious damage. If, for example, a disgruntled employee decides to put a bomb or burn a building, that would not be a terrorist act. It would be just malicious damage. Then we go into the further definitions, the strikes, riots, and civil commotion. I think those are quite well understood and self-explanatory. And the last point there, malicious damage. Some wording say that it has to happen during the disturbance of the public peace. Other ones just say that it is just mischief. It is a big difference depending on the wording you choose, because obviously if it's during the disturbance of the public peace, the example I mentioned before of a disgruntled employee would not be covered. And here we have the insurrection, revolution, and rebellion, coup d'etat, and mutiny, which are again self-explanatory definition for political violence. And finally, what we have: war and civil war. The definitions there. It is important just to finish to mention that although I mentioned in previously the main type of insurance, there is the type of insurance keep evolving depending on the new risks that either through technology or through mishap start to appear and to affect the world. One of the examples is cyber. When I started 20 years ago, no one talked about cyber insurance. Really, when I started 20 years ago, the use of computers was very limited and mainly was used for emails. And that was it. But nowadays, cyber insurance, which is a topic that my colleague Dimaggio will talk about later, it is a very important new type of insurance out there. And again, different types of insurance take relevance. For example, war. A lot of people were not considering war until very recently because there have been in the war in Ukraine, so that brought war to the forefront of people's minds, and a lot of people are now looking forward to buy that kind of cover. And in summary, as you can see, insurance is something that will help you to be more resilient in your endeavors, and it will help you carry on with your activities and your companies in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It looks like you are a young man. 20 years ago, cyber was not such a tough topic. So I'm happy to bring the floor to Dimaggio. Feel free to jump in. Thanks again, Carlos, for your very good presentation.
Good day, everyone.
Dimaggio, please give us 1 more minute just to synchronize the presentation on the French phone, please.
Perfect. Thank you.
It's okay. You are good to go. Thank you.
While we start, I want to say thank you to Invest in Africa and our counterparts at Control Risk for a very good presentation thus far. And I think one of the key messages that I always try to stress is the importance of knowing one's cyber posture position and knowing the difference that different political environments are leading us into in regards to the dynamics of where cybersecurity is going. And I will start with my topic, which is cyber resilience within Africa's extractive industries. So I'm very excited to speak about this topic. I am the head of cyber technology and media at UIB Group. I have an international remit, but I'm always interested to zero in and look at the African continent very rich in natural resources, very rich in technology, and it's a developing continent or group of nations where there are different stages of maturity within their cyber hygiene practices, from national point of view or from large companies that reside or domicile within that region. So I would like to start by looking at just what are extractive industries. I think for some of our participants and stakeholders on the call, it might not be exactly obvious, but these are businesses that take raw materials, including oil, coal, gold, iron, and copper from the earth, and they process it in different ways after extracting. And I think one of the key factors of extractive industries is basically most products come out of this very initial stage of development, and this is where we're seeing a lot of activity within the cyber security cyber crime space. So what is cyber resilience? So cyber resilience is very simple. It's the ability to prepare for, respond to, and recover from cyber attacks. So we need to be very clear about what does it take to be cyber resilient. And actually, it requires continuous investment to maintain a truly proactive cyber defense position. It's not just a set of rules, but it should be ingrained within the risk management culture of an organization. And I say that because a lot of cyber attacks, cyber breaches, security breaches, a lot of human error, a lot of them originate from human error. A lot of these cyber losses that we turn on our televisions and we see, this company has been breached, this company has suffered a ransomware attack, and this company has an outage or business interruption based on a network outage. And these are the pivotal kind of steps that companies start to look at in regards to what their assets are, where they're placed, what redundancies do you have in place, what types of training have we given to employees to make sure that they know what to do if the worst happens. And then what kind of investment are you putting into your organization? Not just your overall network perimeter, but what does your purchases look like in the future in regards to one, operational technology, two, your IT network as well, and then three, within the training aspect of it. So with that, it would be interesting to look at Africa's top 5 cyber threats. So one thing we have here is they're heavily weighted towards human error again. We're humans, we make mistakes. There are things within computer systems and within a network perimeters that everyone doesn't need access to. And as we go through this presentation, I think it will become even more clear around the principle of least privilege, the other aspects of privilege access management, password protection, and making sure that systems, where appropriate, are segregated to ensure that a breach, an interruption, or a malware attack or ransomware attack, virus doesn't take down the whole organization, but can be segregated and contained to a certain place within the network, which allows business continuity. So first we have online scams. Everyone knows what that is. That's fake emails, text messages, claiming to be from a legitimate source to track individuals or to trick individuals into revealing personal, financial, confidential information. So we see those all the time, right? And then you have digital extortion, where victims are tricked into sharing sometimes sexual compromising images, which can be used to blackmail. We've seen a lot of persons within a corporate organization sometimes using their work emails for personal reasons as well. And I think, segregation between the personal and the professional is absolutely key as well, to make sure that the network perimeters of your organization is secure. And then again, we're talking about emails, business email compromise. Criminals hack into the emails systems to gain information about corporate payments, about the corporate payment systems, or to deceive employees into transferring money. And so we call that social engineering. And this is where bad actors come in, and they usually use very believable tactics and persons within an organization to exploit for bad purposes or ill purposes, ill-gotten gains. So, and then we look at ransomware, which everyone knows, and botnetting, which is where you might have compromised machines, which are used as a tool for larger cyber attacks. And so, we look at the different phases of cyber criminals. You have your hackers, which everybody knows. You have organized crime, organized professional criminals. You have politically motivated hacktivists or extremists. And then you have, your industrial espionage, which we're seeing a lot of large oil, gas, large engineering firms being, falling foul of espionage. And then we're looking at disgruntled employees as well. A lot of times breaches come from within. And this is why I was saying earlier about what I was saying earlier about making sure that you operate on models of least privilege. The less that a person has access to within a firm, that's the least damage they can do. Innocuously as well, you can be in a large organization or a small one, and network details are compromised. And what you don't want is for one person's credentials to be used to bring down the whole organization, or to inflict any harm from a digital point of view. And then when you look at employee vendor error as well, you see a lot of hacktivists and bad actors getting in via third-party providers. So everyone has them. You have the third-party providers. I won't name any that have direct access into your systems, whether they deal with your own cybersecurity or maintenance of different software and hardware systems of your firm. And so you have to monitor those as well. And then just looking at, because everybody likes to put a number on cyber, right? We want to see what's going on. How much does things cost? And that's what board of directors we usually look to ask for as well. So cybercrime and numbers. So we're looking at, so from cybersecurity ventures, they expect global cybercrime to cost just over $10.5 trillion by 2025. Now that's the cost of it. And those costs come from things that you might not think. So we're not just speaking about, hackers stealing money here. We're talking about rebuilding of network infrastructure, lost time and wage, business interruption. We're talking about system and data recreation or reconstitution. Those are costs to the real economy. $10.5 trillion is, almost half GDP of the US in a given year. And when you put those numbers in aggregate and really start to look at them in that context, you get to see how big cybercrime is. It's a budgeting business. And I think, jurisdictions around the world are looking more and more to track down these bad actors and to bring them to justice. The next one, cybercrime and numbers again. You see the average, annual cost for cyber losses for a large enterprise probably is about 6.1 million. Well, we can say euros for this one. And then you look at the global, costs of cybersecurity, of cyber crime in the global economy is just at the moment touching on 445 billion US dollars, and that's rising. And those are things that are reported and estimated. These numbers are rising every day. More and more people, as the internet becomes available within the global sphere, are falling victims to hacks and different scams. And so being progressive, being able to know where business assets are and having a plan to protect those is very key. And then when we look at the oil and gas sector, I think one of the challenges that we have is, again, business owners knowing their systems. Just like you know your customers, you need to know your systems and your business assets. Don't wait until you have a full-blown cyber event. And what do I mean about the cyber event? Whether you have network intrusion, whether you have a ransom demand, whether you have an internal meltdown of your systems just because a bug had you are updating your system and a bug was created within it, and now the network is inoperable. You're not going to wait until something happens of that nature or that scale to get serious about where do you want your organization to be in regards to its cyber hygiene, and putting that into practice and making sure that it's not only a one-time thing just to get cyber insurance, but it's a constant year-round effort. And speaking about cyber insurance, we're here now. We're here because I think this is one of my specialities. I actually play cyber insurance on a global basis, as I said before. But looking at cyber, and even though we're talking about cyber resilience today, cyber insurance is one of the key components to that as well. Because after a business has calculated their risk, has put in IT security controls to mitigate and manage exposures, then they look to see how much they can offload. And when I say offload, I say that with a very cautious sentiment there, because at the moment, we're seeing massive challenges within the cyber insurance market or cybersecurity insurance market, because as we know, the internet, you have the Internet of Things, you have various inflows to an organization that are numerous to mention, various ports into organization, channeling data in and out, and there lies a large bit of exposure. And the cyber market at the moment is trying to deal with it as best as possible, but with the support of international stakeholders, regulators, and IT security firms globally to try to seek best practices or seek out best practices. And what we have now is minimum standards that underwriters really look for within the cyber market. So at the moment, the cyber market capacity is around probably $250 million line. And what that means is that's probably the maximum limits we'll get at this time in this period of time. That used to be higher, but underwriters are very cautious at the moment. And obviously, insurance was always a risk selection exercise anyway. And what underwriters and insurers are looking for at the moment is clients who are proactive in their risk management for cyber, proactive in making sure that they have proper patching, responsive patching, and a plan around it, making sure that where you have vulnerabilities within your system, that they're documented and they're managed. And there's a mitigation plan if the worst was to come to worst. And so these things aren't, new stuff that we're talking about within cyber. These things are just what the market is pushing and we as insurance intermediaries as well, it's our duty to make sure that our clients understand, one, their policy, but understand the process. And I'm always excited to go through that with clients. So as we spoke about, the demand for cyber insurance is being driven by, one, the increased value of intellectual property and other proprietary information within organizations. The digital space has grown. The digital space is growing, and we're seeing now an increase in how in the proportion of the value of tangible assets and intangible assets. And so with that, we need to find different frameworks and different risk management frameworks to, one, to calculate that risk, quantify it, manage it, and mitigate further loss to business assets, intangible or tangible. And then you look for cyber insurance after you've calculated what your potential loss will be. And that's a conversation between your broker, your underwriter, and any internal audit team as well. Because as we said, cybersecurity controls are evolving in nature. And what might have looked like a good snapshot of your network perimeter today might tell a whole different story tomorrow, especially with the increase and the speed of vulnerabilities that are sometimes unpatched. And then going quickly towards some of the coverages, we're looking at privacy breach costs. We all know those. Cybercrime, which is social engineering, and theft of funds via unauthorized or authorized means. And then you have regulatory fines and penalties where insurable by law. And then a lot of the liability aspects of the cyber policy as well bring up a duty to defend clause in nature. And so if you are a party to a suit in which your firm has been named to have violated the confidentiality agreements that were signed, violated or innocuously transferred viruses or malware to a third party's computer system, this policy will respond to that. And there's a large, and because we're on first party coverages, there's a large value in ascertaining what goes on first if you have a cyber event. So, this first party cost, the privacy breach costs, the notification costs, the forensic evaluation costs, and most policies actually have incident response piece as well. And that's where vendors are structured in a strategic way to be able to triage a situation and really deal with an issue. And sometimes even close it down before it becomes a full-blown claim. And so what we're looking at is a proactive and reactive policy, really, because it reacts to the immediate situations on a 24-hour, 365-day basis. And there are plans in place for dealing with certain types of losses, claims, when they do occur. So that's the proactive part of it. And then obviously we were talking about third-party claims, which is, confidentiality, breach cover, network security liability, and your media liability, which, nobody likes, it's not a, glamorous topic to talk about. But there is coverage to make sure that your business is holistically taken care of. And as I was saying, cyber insurance is more than just coverage, and this is some of the services that you see in the market: the breach response, the cyber forensics, and the legal expenses, and the crisis communication. And then you have specialist forensic accountants to calculate business interruption losses within the policy. So it's a living policy, we call it, very responsive and reactive policy. And the good thing is it's changing almost, 3 or 4 times a year, we're seeing insurers come out with different coverage enhancements or ways in which you can look at a specific industry, such as this, the extractive industries. What might be good for a mining firm might not be specifically suited to an oil and gas drilling platform. So you have specialist cyber insurance to fill those gaps in exposure to reinforce the balance sheet. And claims cost. Everybody likes to look at the numbers again, but this one is in percentages. We kind of look at what triggers or what hits a cyber policy, what costs the most, and most times we always go to liability, legal defense, and most times it's the forensics, it's the first party costs, the forensic evaluations that tells you what happens, post cyber event. You do have, for some of your privacy heavy industries such as hospitality, retail is a privacy element as well to that on an individual basis. But then when you look at business interruption cost and expenses, and then system repair and reconstitution, there is those first party costs to your business that sometimes even though the liability aspect is there, especially within very developing countries within Africa, there's a less of a remit for legal defense, and businesses are proactively looking for first party coverages. And then I put some stuff in the slides just so you can have some bedtime reading about cyber insurance. Lovely slides on cyber property damage and the likes. And these are just a small toolkit for you to look at what your cyber exposures are, and to look to see how you can mitigate that and develop a proper cyber resilience framework that carries your business not only today but for decades to come.
Thank you, DiMaggio. Very, very good presentation, very clear and very straight to the point. And I see how passionate you are about it. And maybe you can talk for the next 2 hours about this great topic.
I told you, I said, tell me the time.
Would you mind I raise 3 questions as you are still on the floor before switching to Rolake and maybe to Carlos too? So I have 3 questions for you.
Yeah.
The first one, it's a great one. It's about we hear a lot about cyber resilience, and do you think it's an exercise? Do you think it's an exercise that's just important at the moment, but will eventually just sit in the background with the risk management department in the future, or is it something critical? That's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is about Africa as a continent, its quest of enhanced cyber resilience.
Yeah.
So I'd be glad to share your view of the future, if I can say. Yeah. And last one, sorry for this quick 3 questions because we are running out of time, but I want them to have a chance to hear of your answers. And the last one is about risk managers, and they are attaching a value to cyber resilience. Yeah. And they want to see results as an investment of cyber stability and preparedness. So what are your thoughts about these 3 topics, please? Thanks for that.
Thanks so much. Very loaded questions, but let's see how we can whittle through them. So, in regards to the first one, I think, cyber resilience is becoming commonplace within the risk management framework within firms. I think when we look at where health and safety or workplace safety has come in the last 50 years, coming to the forefront of most businesses, especially in the extractive industry. I think, cyber resilience will sit near there. the fact that probably in the future, it wouldn't be a need for certain conferences to drive and to beat this kind of these kind of practices into businesses, it might be a good thing, and that probably will show the maturity of firms. Just how Reloke mentioned about compliance and audit procedures. These will form the holistic point of view within the risk management and due diligence sectors within a firm, and overall to the culture. Now, looking at cyber resilience, what can be done in Africa or in the African continent? It's probably engagement and interaction with cybersecurity stakeholders and standard bearers internationally. I think there is a really good framework that NIST has put out in regards to extractive industries, but there is massive value in sharing information and experiences internationally as well. And I think the African continent has done well up until this point to try to get themselves more accustomed or more familiar with international standards, cybersecurity standards. And the West has done the same, I think, but there's need for greater cooperation within that sector. And I think, conferences like this, webinars like this, Invest in Africa, this is the proper format to voice opinions and to really create a safe space in which businesses and stakeholders alike can interact. And then thirdly, the value. How do you measure value of cyber resilience? I think you have to look at the value impact of what hasn't occurred. We have a lot of these business models now that currently you can model your business interruption loss. You can model the legal parameters or the legal impact of system outage based on your contractual obligations. And so if that hasn't occurred, then that's a value, right? And then looking at positive hygiene doesn't actually mean network inefficiency as well. I think there's always an element of untruth or opacity in regards to looking at upgrading the network, being very secure, being cybersecurity positively led by cyber hygiene practices that are obviously fills kind of global frameworks or standards that would take away from the efficiency of the business. But I look at it as one, you are standardizing very established practices internationally, globally, global accepted standards from a national point of view. And sometimes those standards are actually written into contracts for bids and tenders. So we've seen a lot of organizations using kind of the investment that they have done for cybersecurity and their cyber hygiene to actually tick the box and say, yes, we have minimum cyber security standards to this level or to this certification. And sometimes these tenders, they are locked to firms who do meet that metric. And so it's a benefit to your business to actually have that. One, to acquire contracts, and then two, to make sure that you can fulfill those contractual obligations. Because one thing you don't want is to acquire more business and to over leverage your operational needs just to have a cyber event kind of deplete the development aspects of your business. I think it's a business risk. Cyber it's a tough evolving risk, but it's a proactive steps. I think with most things, and cyber is no different. And we speak about it like it's rocket science, but the proactive steps to proper and tangible cyber hygiene practices within an organization is what's needed, and follow guidelines. I would always say follow established guidelines, because the experts do have very deep experiences within these industry types as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Maggio. Carlos, are you okay to give you to give us a summary about the questions are already answered in the chat box, but I guess it may be of huge interest for all the audience. It's about the insurance that covers all risk. Can you list the type of cover that a company working in the oil and gas sector should take out, and make the difference between an oil company and a company providing services in the oil sector, as well as the reputation risk? So sorry for that big questions, and you may have only 1 or 2 minutes to answer before before we switch to Rolake. But take your time to give us some insight, please.
The first question: what an all risk policy includes all the material damage that I listed in my presentation. Includes fire and allied perils, machinery breakdown, electronic equipment, cat perils, and everything that is not explicitly excluded. So this is now how most insurance placements are done in the market, just at all risk policies. What insurances oil companies should have? Obviously, should have an all risk policy, third-party liability, terrorism and extractive commission policy, cyber, and depending on their activities, if it's cargo or not, then a cargo policy. And talking about the service, the oil service companies, as the name is, it is more service orientated. So the main insurance that they should have is third-party liability, and probably an errors and omissions policy to cover obviously any errors, unintentional error or omissions they may commit during their service to the industry. But obviously it depends, because a lot of oil service companies have quite important assets, such as machinery, so they will need to cover that machinery also. Well, that was a very quick answer there.
Yeah, most definitely. Thanks for that. Thank you. Thank to the both of you. I will switch to Rolake, please. Rolake, I have also 3 questions for you. Would you mind give us your view, please, on the top risk that companies would consider when building their compliance program in West Africa? What are some of the other consequences of compliance breaches or failures beyond enforcement? And lastly, not the least important, in your experience, what are some of the biggest challenges that compliance departments face in Africa? Thank you again, and sorry to be such in a rush, but take your time to give us this this insightful answers, please.
Sure. Thanks again, Boko Alpha. I'll just make it really quick, just because I'm conscious of time. So the first question was around the top 3 risks that companies should consider. The first, I would say, and I think I kind of touched on each of these at different points when I spoke, but the first that I would say is anti-bribery and corruption risk. When interfacing with, especially when interfacing with government agencies, the risk of having to pay bribes and the risk of corruption kind of increases, and we've seen this play out in numerous scandals that have been reported in the last decade or so. We found that when we've talked about, or when we've heard about stories around bribery and corruption, we found that most often, there's usually some sort of interface with the public sector. So, of course, when dealing with government agencies, when obtaining licenses, for instance, when it comes to regulatory reviews, for instance, the exposure to bribery and corruption risk increases. So that's the first I would say. The second I would also say is regulatory risk. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the oil and gas industry specifically in Senegal and Mauritania is still being developed. And with that comes with development and evolution of the regulatory landscape, the nature of the agencies that you would have to interact with as companies in the oil and gas industry or in the extractive space. So with that, the regulatory landscape and environment is consistently evolving, while companies are getting into the production phases and stages. The third that I would say, so I'm not sure which to pick, so I have two others that I would just touch on. One is the political landscape, which of course in West Africa, that's kind of the political landscape is a bit unsteady, for lack of a better word. So that's just an area to look out for. That's just an area to be informed, to be constantly informed of. And then the final one is sort of what DiMaggio talked about in cyber-related risk. The technology industry is evolving in Nigeria, and we're finding that more and more companies, especially in the financial industry, but companies seem to be adapting to the technological changes. With COVID, since COVID, we've seen that sector sort of blow. And of course, with that comes with risk associated with cybercrime and cyber-related breaches. So that's another area to look out for. The next question, in terms of compliance breaches, so consequences for compliance breaches beyond enforcement. So there are several consequences other than enforcement and sanctions. There could be a disruption to business operations. There could be loss of licenses as well. And of course, those go hand in hand. So if a company, if an oil and gas company, for instance, loses its license to produce, then that would disrupt operations. So those sort of go hand in hand. And I mean, reputational damage as well is another area. And then the final question, some of the biggest challenges that the compliance function faces, and I mentioned this earlier as well. I found that staffing and resourcing has been quite a bit of a challenge for companies in general when it comes to staffing their compliance function. And I think it goes to show the weight of importance that companies put on the compliance function. A lot of companies, as I mentioned, see compliance as a tick box function, just as a necessary unit, and not as one that should be partnered with in order to mitigate and deal with the risks that companies are faced with. So the major challenge that I have seen compliance departments face is really with resourcing. A lot of times compliance functions feel that they are understaffed and under-resourced. So yeah, that's just me breezing through the questions because I'm conscious of time. Thanks.
Okay, and I will repeat again. I'm sorry for the persons who raised questions, but since the beginning we're unable to answer to all the questions. But we'll try to do our best to share with you some questions to our experts and wait for them to give them to give some feedback. Thanks again, everybody. We are very conscious of time. We are facing power failure where I am right now. That's why I'm through my mobile. So thanks again for being such a numerous audience to these very important topics for Africa region. And thanks again for Rolake, DiMaggio, and Carlos for your great insight. We are here for giving. For supporting capacity and capability in the local content strategy and the operational effectiveness in Mauritania and Senegal, just like this event has tangibly demonstrated it. So please free to feedback. Feel free also to go to investinafrica.com as well as appmauritania.com and appsenegal.com. You will be able to register to find out more about our programs, our future events, our webinars, our workshops, and thanks again for being for your great attention. It's for following this event in two rooms, and thanks for Control Risk and UAB, and looking forward of delivering again great events for people and for SMEs to be industry ready. Thanks again. Bye bye. Take care. All the best.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. My pleasure. Bye bye.